Seems like what's right. Okay. Person. Great. Okay. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. I was worried no one was going to show up today. So this is great to see a full house here in person. How many folks do we have online? 10. Okay, great. Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you so much for coming tonight. I appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to attend this event all about heat pumps. To start off, my name is Sarah Brumer. I am the environmental program specialist here at the city of Shoreline. And I've been here for a little over a year and a half. But we are just getting ready to kind of launch a home electrification program. And with that, we were able to partner with the cities of Lake Forest Park and Kenmore to kind of, throw an impromptu home electrification event series. I'm curious, how many of you attended any of the events back in July and August on, I see some hands going up, solar and induction cooking? Great. Okay. Seems like a good portion of you. But yeah, and I will go ahead and introduce our speaker and our community member that are also here today. But before I do that, I am just curious to know as well, kind of everyone's familiarity with heat pumps and the whole process of installation, getting contractors and whatnot. Who in the room, by raise of hands, and also in the virtual room, who is like brand new to heat pumps? You're here learning for the first time, like, I have no idea what it is. Oh, wow. Okay. For those that can't see, it is a good chunk of the room here in person. What about, are you thinking you're already in the steps of, you want a heat pump, you're just really confused about finding contractors or whatnot and the whole installation process? Raise of hand. Okay, still a good chunk, but smaller minority. Okay, thank you. Next, I will go ahead and introduce Sid, since he is right next to me over here. Do you want to introduce yourself to the room? Use this one. Yeah.
Yes, my name is Sydney Kuboy. I'm a resident of Echo Lake, Shoreline resident for about 25 years. And I'm sitting here because I went through this journey several years ago and I put a heat pump, a ductless mini split in our house about 5 or 6 years ago. And to the extent that it's new now, it was even newer to contractors back then. So I've learned quite a bit on this journey, along with some other electrification we've done in the house, such that now today we're an all electric house. So I'm here to try to offer some been there, done that kind of perspective to things, to complement the higher level professional presentation that Brian's going to offer to us tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, so Sid will be here for the Q&A portion. So sorry, I forgot to do a rundown of the kind of plan for tonight. Brian, who is our speaker, who is presenting virtually this evening, will give a presentation for about 30 to 35 minutes. And then after that, we've set aside the rest of the evening for Q&A for folks to ask questions. And that's part of the reason why Sid is here. And he was so kind enough to offer his insight and wisdom, is that you can speak with him about his own process and kind of learn lessons learned in his heat pump experience and journey. But without further ado, I will pass it over to Brian on the screen here. If you want to do a short intro and then get started.
Great. Hello, everyone. Sorry I can't be there with you in person. This is the next best thing for me, I guess, but I'm beaming in from Portland, Oregon. Brian Stewart's my name. I'm a co-founder of Electrify Now, and basically, just to give you a little background on who we are, my wife and I started this organization about 5 years ago. I retired from my job where I'd been a vice president of sustainable innovation at Nike for many years. So I had a really good background in corporate sustainability, but when I retired, I was really interested in what individuals could do to fight climate change and make their homes more comfortable and more energy efficient. And it felt like there really wasn't good information that was available to just regular people like you and I out there about all the amazing things that are available to us today. So we started Electrify Now really just to help educate people about the amazing benefits of electrification, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And the reason why this is so exciting is because not only is it a way for us to make our homes more comfortable and more energy efficient, but we reduce our own carbon emissions. But really, maybe even more importantly than that, these actions we're going to be talking about today, things that all of us can do as individuals, are really essential to help transition our energy systems away from fossil fuel-based systems to clean, renewable-based systems that are the future. And will happen regardless of what you and I want or will do, but will happen faster if people like you and I embrace these solutions. So that's why this is super exciting. I love the kind of tagline or name of this program that Shoreline has picked, Go Electric. It's great. And really what we're going to be talking about are all these incredible benefits that come along with going electric. Obviously, you get a healthier, and we'll talk about all these in more detail. You get a healthier, more comfortable home. You dramatically lower your carbon emissions. We'll really talk a lot about that today. And then, of course, you lower your energy bills, which everybody loves. And this is something that we can give you a really good picture of what that looks like today. But these differences that we're going to be talking about will get more dramatic as we go forward. So, Go Electric. It's a great tagline, and what makes this possible, everything we're going to be talking about today, is this new generation of super efficient electrical products and appliances that are, most of us did, well, they weren't available. We grew up, they're different than things we grew up with. And so a lot of people are just unfamiliar with these things, even though they're not really technically that new, they're just maybe new to us. But these products massively outperform these older generation of products that we know. They provide new benefits, some of which we'll talk about. They're dramatically less energy, so that reduces our energy bills. And these things add value to our homes. When we do this, the value of our homes increase. There's data about that. We won't talk a lot about it tonight, but it's absolutely true that employing these devices makes our homes more marketable and more valuable. And all of these things dramatically reduce our personal carbon emissions. And that's why there's so much excitement about this what you might hear referred to as electrification or building electrification, et cetera. So we'll be talking about all that today. But the reason why, Shoreline is, you might ask yourself, well, why is Shoreline so interested in making me aware of this? And this is maybe a little bit of behind the scenes about why governments all over the world, and particularly here, and this is what it looks like for Washington, are really homed in on this. It's because if you look at where carbon emissions come from in the state of Washington, you see that the biggest source is transportation, which we won't be talking about today, but this is why it's really important for all of us to embrace EVs, which are another amazing way to have better products that save you money. We won't be talking about that tonight, but you see heating, and this is heating of our buildings. The building that you're in today, has to be heated. Our homes have to be heated. Industry uses heat. That's the second biggest source of carbon emissions in Washington. And then electricity is the third biggest. And this picture is pretty consistent around the country, around the world, to be honest, that these three things, transportation, electricity, and heating, are the biggest sources of carbon emissions. So today we're really going to be talking about heating, and how we can reduce our carbon emissions from heating. But this is one of the reasons why governments like Shoreline are promoting electrification, because they know it's one of the most effective ways to reduce carbon emissions. The other thing that's really inherent in this chart here that you might not be obvious at first, but the reason why these three bubbles here are so big and cause so much carbon emissions is because the only way really that we've been able to achieve these benefits of transportation, heat, and electricity has been from burning fossil fuels historically. So that is where these carbon emissions come from. But now there's new sources of energy that we can use for all of these things. And today we'll be talking, like I said, about heating. If we look at our own homes and look at the picture in our own homes, it's similar in what you see. It's a little bit organized a little bit differently, but the energy that we consume for these same three things, electricity, transportation, and heat, accounts for about 60% of the carbon emissions in a typical home anywhere in the United States. the other portions of our carbon emissions come from the products that we buy. So think of it as merchandise. Every time something arrives from Amazon or whatever, there's carbon emissions associated with making that and getting it to our homes. And then there's carbon emissions associated with the food we eat, and that being transported around the world too. And these two smaller boxes on the right, we can, through diligence and consuming fewer things, buying things locally, buying organic or regeneratively raised produce, all these things can help reduce those two boxes on the right, but it's hard to eliminate them. But this big black box, the 60%, it's entirely possible to make that go to zero, to eliminate all the energy-related carbon emissions in your home. We've done it in our home. Sounds like our guest speaker tonight has done it in his home as well, and we'll be able to talk to you about why that's possible and why it's actually a great thing to do, and it's no compromise. All right, so the reason for all this is that electricity primarily has been using coal and natural gas. Of course, here in the Northwest, we have a lot of hydro and more and more solar and wind, but historically it's been coal and natural gas. We use gasoline and diesel for our transportation, and natural gas, and to some degree propane, more in the rural areas to heat our homes and buildings. I like to focus on the heat part because I think everybody gets that coal plants are bad, and you can smell the pollution from your car every time you turn it on, but most people don't understand or have a same kind of awareness about how bad natural gas is for the environment. It's similar or worse to coal, partly because so much of it escapes from the devices that we own, from the pipelines that are carry this under really high pressure from massive distances. So when you add up all those, what they call fugitive emissions, and plus the combustion, it's similar or worse in some cases than coal in terms of its impact. It's one of the major sources of air pollution. Again, it's not something we talk about because we're aware of that smog that comes from traffic and from, if you have a power plant nearby, you can see it coming out of the smokestack, and you don't really see this pollution that comes from our from our homes, but it's one of the largest sources in California, for example. Is becoming the largest source as their electricity gets cleaner and their transportation gets cleaner. And then the other thing is that there's a lot of misinformation out there, primarily coming from some of the gas industry, about things like renewable natural gas, which are good products. It's a good idea, renewable natural gas, but there's nowhere near enough of it, and it won't save us from having to get off of gas. It's got some good uses, but it's not the equivalent, let's just say, of solar power or wind power, where we'll have clean electricity flying down the electric lines. So that's kind of the bad news in a way, that we have to stop burning fossil fuels. There really isn't an alternative, but the good news is that there is a good alternative, and it's quite effective, and it's getting lower and lower cost all the time. So on this chart here, you can see these two white lines, which are the cost of solar and wind energy, and starting from 2009 to up to 2021. And you can see that the costs have just plummeted in that roughly 10-year period, and they're projected to go even further down. They'll always have a little hiccup now and then because of supply chain things, but the cost of both these things is starting to go down again, and it's projected to go down quite dramatically over the next 20 years as we scale these devices. And the reason why this is happening, it's like, I think all of us kind of get this notion that the more we make of a widget or a thing, the more we get clever about how to reduce costs to make it, which means that we can get it to market for lower and lower costs. And that's what's happening with solar panels. They're getting cheaper and cheaper to make. They get more and more efficient all the time. The same thing's happening with wind turbines. We're finding ways to make them for lower costs and make them much, much more energy efficient in capturing energy from the wind. So that drives costs down. And the more of them we make, the better we get at it, the cheaper it gets. And that's not the same for things like extraction industries, like coal and natural gas, for example, where there's not a lot of economy of scale. In fact, if you look at these numbers, you can see that they've stayed roughly the same in terms of costs over the last 10 years. And they're projected to actually go up because of a lot of things we're not going to talk about today, but suffice it to say, it's very likely the gas prices will go up dramatically in the next 10 years. All right, so the other thing so that's one thing. Renewable energy is getting really low cost to harness. And the other thing that's happening is electric appliances are getting dramatically more efficient, unbelievably so. And in a way, some of this has been happening right before our eyes. We maybe haven't noticed it, but here's just a little comparison of some devices that we're familiar with and how they've changed in energy efficiency over the last 30 years. So I'm using, to start with, gas furnaces. This is the minimum efficiency standard. So, the federal government says gas furnaces have to hit a certain efficiency. That's changed 2% in the last 30 years. So essentially what that means is a gas furnace today is no more efficient than it was 30 years ago. For heat pumps, the efficiency standard has increased by 30%. And in fact, the things that are in the market have improved dramatically more than that. But the very minimum, they've increased 30%, air conditioners 40%, dishwashers 100%. So that means that a dishwasher today is using half the amount of energy that was produced 30 years ago. Refrigerators 155% more energy efficient. And a heat pump water heater, which is, we're not going to talk about it too much today, but it's another amazing technology that you should be familiar with, is incredibly energy efficient. It's almost 3 times more energy efficient than an electric resistance water heater. And then LED light bulbs, which of course, I think are almost the poster child for energy efficiency and electrification. They use, 1/5, or you can say they're 5 times more energy efficient than an incandescent bulb, and they last longer and have all these other benefits. So what you can see here is that electric devices use way less energy now than they did even just a few years ago. Not the same for gas appliances. They basically are very similar in terms of the amount of energy they use. So if you look at this as an amalgamated way across the country, what you see is that since 2000, the United States is basically using the same amount of energy. It's a little bit more than we did 2000, but not a lot compared, especially when you consider the fact that we've got more people living here now than we did 20 years ago. But in that time, the emissions that come from electricity have dramatically reduced for those reasons that we talked about, getting rid of coal plants and replacing them with wind turbines and solar farms, et cetera. And, we're projecting that the emissions from electricity will go down and down and down. In fact, Washington State has laws that mandate it gets 100% renewable by 2045, I believe. And so this is going to happen for economic reasons and also for some of these legislative reasons that vary around the country, but are all in this realm of electrification. The federal government is providing huge incentives for solar and wind generation, et cetera. So you're going to see this curve just continue to go down. So with all that news, like cheap renewables, really efficient electric devices that do everything that we need them to do, you almost can't escape this idea that we should be electrifying everything. And you'll hear that terminology being used. And it's really a sort of conjuring up this sustainable future where the wind and the sun powers all of our primary energy needs: electricity, transportation, and heat. And by the way, transportation, I hope you guys are seeing some of those Amazon electric vans starting to deliver products to your home with really high efficiency electric devices, but that's happening as well. Okay, and then it's almost too good to be true when you look at the side benefits that come along with this. We've sort of been talking in terms of carbon emissions, but there's huge energy cost savings, and we'll talk about this at the household level in a minute. But we also get cleaner air, because think about this for a second. Where does air pollution come from? Air pollution and carbon pollution are essentially the same. They're linked. Air pollution comes from cars, comes from coal plants, comes from our burning natural gas in our homes. So when we stop doing that and replace it with clean energy, that means that suddenly we're going to have really clean air, and we'll have a lot more clean water. There's huge amounts of water that are used for processing fossil fuels generation and extraction and power plants, et cetera. All that means we'll have healthier people, which reduces our health costs dramatically, like potentially billions of dollars a year in this country. And all of that helps build a stronger economy. So there's all the side benefits that come along on this journey towards getting away from fossil fuels based energy. Okay, so let's make it really a little bit more relatable. Let's think about our own home. Think about your home, for example. Okay, a typical home in Washington state, the energy that they consume would produce about 3 to 5 tons of carbon emissions. So if you're on Puget Sound Energy, for example, this is pretty close to the number that you would be generating through the energy you consume in your home every year. If you're in Seattle City Lights territory, however, because they have such clean energy, it's almost zero from your electricity. And this is a good snapshot, I think, of sort of like where we are and where we're going, because Seattle City Lights is kind of an example of what the whole state of Washington is going to look like very soon. And more of the country will look like this every day. Oregon will be this way soon too. But you have the benefit of being really clean in terms of your electricity today, which is fantastic. But one gas car will produce 4 to 8 tons of carbon emissions per year, which is about the same as a gas furnace, which might surprise a lot of people. And a gas water heater, that's the other large source of, well, it's one of the most expensive things that you pay for in terms of your energy bill, but also one of the largest sources of carbon emissions in any typical home here in Washington. Okay, so let's compare that to a home that's using renewable energy and has electrified, and you could be getting 100% renewable electricity. Like you say, Seattle City Lights is very close to that already. That would, with renewables, you would be getting 0 tons from your electricity use. And then you charge your electric vehicle with that clean energy. That means it's producing 0 tons, driving thousands of miles a year with producing no carbon emissions. You can heat and cool your home for 0 tons of carbon emissions. And you can heat your water also with 0 tons of carbon emissions. And so, we'll be hearing from someone who's done this in their own home here later on. But so this is amazing. You know, think of this comparison from today, where a typical home in Washington would produce somewhere between 15 and 25 tons of carbon emissions per year from the energy that we consume, and a renewable energy plus electrification home, that's 0 tons. But the other dramatic thing that happens is energy costs go down quite substantially. Instead of, for a typical home with 2 cars, you would be expecting to pay about $7,500 a year between your electric bill, your natural gas bill, and the gasoline that you purchase to put in your cars. And that would compare to $3,000 if you had 2 electric vehicles and a heat pump water heater, etc. So, you know, $4,500 a year saved from energy costs after you've made this transition, which is why, again, there's so much interest in this topic. All right, so the technologies that make this possible in our homes are heat pump water heaters, which I've mentioned, heat pumps for space heating and also for air conditioning, induction ranges and cooktops for cooking to replace gas stoves, electric fireplace inserts, which will replace, you know, gas fireplace inserts, and heat pump dryers, which are the most efficient way to dry our clothing, and then electric vehicles, as we mentioned. So today, we're really only going to be talking about heat pumps for space heating and air conditioning. But all of these devices deserve the same kind of attention because they're all amazing in terms of their ability to provide really great performance and also reduce our energy expenditures. Okay, so heat pumps for space heating and air conditioning. It's important to know that this is not some kind of compromise or some sort of second best way to keep warm. This is actually a better technology because, for one thing, it provides heating and cooling with one system. So gas furnaces, of course, can't do that. And air conditioners tend to be lower efficiency than heat pumps, which we'll talk about. So there's energy savings on the cooling side and on the heating side with heat pumps. They provide incredibly constant temperatures, and that's because they operate almost continuously. And that means that if you set your thermostat to 70 or 72, whatever you're comfortable with, it's going to stay exactly that temperature, and it will be that temperature almost throughout your whole home. Whereas a furnace, which produces huge amounts of heat, has to turn on and off and on and on and on and off. And that means that the temperature in your home goes up to, you set your temperature at 72, for example, we're probably going to go up to 74 and then down to 68 and then up to 74 and down to 68, etc. And that means that it's only on for a short period. So that means it's really warm next to the registers and not so warm on the other side of the room. Whereas with a heat pump, it's moving all the time. The air is moving through your house all the time. So it's going through the air filters more continuously, which means you have really clean indoor air, more air filtration. All this adds up to superior comfort, people report, and there's dehumidification benefits that come along with this as well that are sometimes important. Not so much in our climate, but in some areas that's really important. And all of this comes along with, a 4 to 8 ton reduction in carbon emissions per year. So it's pretty dramatic. Heat pumps can sound pretty, I don't know, like science fiction-y and hard to explain to people. And I won't go into the physics because it is a little hard to explain. But on the other hand, these devices are things that are super familiar to us. I mean, our refrigerator is a heat pump. So basically, if you think about it, your refrigerator, the way it works is it's moving heat from inside that closed box to your kitchen. So maybe you felt that warm air coming from behind the kitchen, or sometimes it's blown from underneath the refrigerator. So it's slightly warming your kitchen and you barely notice that. But inside it's dramatically colder. Obviously in the freezer, it's, can be down to 0 degrees. So these things are incredibly energy efficient. And as I mentioned earlier with that slide on energy efficiency, you see that these things have been getting more and more and more energy efficient. That's because these heat pumps just get better and better and better all the time. They use very small amounts of energy to move heat from one place to another instead of creating heat. And so these things are so effective that even when it's really hot in your kitchen, like we had this during the heat dome that was well publicized here a couple of summers ago, before we turned our air conditioning on, it was almost 100 degrees in our kitchen. And yet our refrigerator was still making ice in the refrigerator. So it's a huge temperature difference that these things are able to achieve and work within. And it can, as you'll see, heat pumps for face heating or heat pumps like this device in your refrigerator, but they can work both directions. They can heat and cool. And so heat pumps for space heating use, again, this same technology of these little pumps that are moving heat from one place to another, but they come in a couple of different varieties. If you have gas furnace in your home today, and that means you have you have ducting that goes through your home and you have air vents where the warm air comes out into your rooms, then you would most likely opt for a ducted, or what's often referred to as a central heat pump. And these things look they have 2 major components. They have this external unit that looks a lot like a air conditioner unit if you have one of those today. It sits outside your home, and it's the thing that's harvesting energy from outside in order to heat your home, or taking energy from in your home and dumping it outside if you're trying to cool your home. And it connects to what's called an air handler, which it basically would replace your furnace. It sits in your basement or your utility room, is connected to your ducts, and it's the thing that's blowing the air back into your home. And it's connected to this outside unit with these refrigerant lines that move the heat basically back and forth from one place to another. So one of the things that's really nice about these units is you can put these big 4-inch air filters on them, or you can even get HEPA filters. If you're really concerned about indoor air quality, we geek out about it. In our house, we have a HEPA filter, which is great during the wildfire season, because when we turn that thing on, we get immaculately clean air inside, even when it's like unbelievably smoky outdoors. So these things are great from that standpoint. A gas furnace isn't going to do that for you. But it's really important if that's something that matters to you, that when you're talking to the contractor, make sure that they're going to put in a 4-inch filter, not a 1-inch filter, they're not useless, but they're not great. A 4-inch filter, the difference between a 4-inch filter and a 1-inch filter is dramatic in terms of the cleanliness of your indoor air. So this system, this ducted system, is best for homes that have gas furnaces now and existing ductwork. Maybe you live in a home that has baseboard heating. electric baseboard heating. So you don't have ducts. So you can't use one of these central ducted systems. You need to use what's called ductless systems. And we have one here in the studio that I'm in. That's what's up there on the wall. I don't know if you can see it. It's probably small for you to see, but in this picture, this unit on the wall is called a mini split, or sometimes it's called a high wall, or a, it's the thing that's blowing the warm air and the cool air into your room. It's connected to an outdoor device that's similar to the one that we just talked about. They sometimes come in this more suitcase size. The ducted ones are super efficient and look typically like that. These are great for homes that have baseboard heating now. They can be awesome to reduce reliance on gas heating. Maybe you put one of these in your main living area and you still have gas for the rest of your home. That's sometimes possible. The one drawback of them is, I don't know if it's a drawback, it's just something you'd be aware of, is that while they have incredibly high heating efficiency, these are the most energy efficient devices that exist, are these ductless units. They have less air filtration because you can't put in a 4-inch filter. So if you go that way, I highly recommend that you get one of these home air purifiers. They're really cheap. For $250, you can get one of these that will take care of several rooms. And maybe, you can get smaller ones that are great for bedrooms and that sort of thing. And they're incredibly effective. They take very little energy. Like I say, Consumer Reports has really good articles that rate them, but they're made from multiple brands. I highly recommend these devices because they're great, particularly during wildfire season. And you kind of need this if you're going with the ductless variety. And then, of course, there's combinations of those systems are also possible, where you might have a ducted system, but maybe you've got a ductless mini split. Maybe upstairs, if you've got an older home that isn't well served from the central vents, sometimes it can be good to put one of these mini splits upstairs to cool the upstairs and heat the upstairs while the vents are taking care of the lower floors. There's another thing that's interesting that you might want to be aware of. They're called portable heat pumps. These are small units that either fit inside windows, or in this configuration, it's kind of a roll around unit that blows air out through windows through this kind of vent kit. They're quite cost effective for about $600. They can give you really good supplemental heating and cooling. I mean, they don't have the same kind of power as these two devices we're just talking about, and they don't work when it gets really cold. But they're a great way to use less gas or baseboard heating. In most of the year, they're going to be effective, but in the coldest months of the year, they're not going to help very much. But these things are kind of a cheap way to get into the whole world of heat pumps. We did a webinar on this a while ago. We're actually doing another one tomorrow on this exact topic. If you're interested, I'll give you that information later. Okay, so a lot of people wonder, well, or maybe people hear, oh, hey, I've heard about heat pumps, but I heard they just don't work in our area because it's too cold here. And that's just not true. That was kind of like old news. So it's sort of partially true, because originally heat pumps came into this country primarily for the southern part of the country, where cooling was the main problem. And a little bit of heat was needed, in December when the temperature plummeted to 70 degrees, you had to have a little heat. So that's why heat pumps were really popular in the South. They still are, but that's a different device than what's needed where we are. So these units that were imported for areas where it's warm were meant to maximize cooling efficiency, because that's what they were used mostly for, and they just needed to provide a little bit of heat. Where we are in the northern part of the United States, we need the other way around. We need a device that provides a lot of heat and is pretty decent at cooling. And so the products that we need are different than the products you need in the South. And part of the reason why this mythology that they aren't effective in cold areas is because maybe people try to use one of these units from the South in the North, and it doesn't work. But these heat pumps are being used in the very coldest parts of Vermont and Maine and Alaska even. So they are totally effective everywhere really in the United States, but especially in our more relatively temperate climate. Their heat pumps are fantastic. Okay, so this is a little bit technical, but this may help you understand why you need to get the right heat pump. So what this graph is it's showing the amount of energy that a home needs in order to stay warm as the temperature outside gets colder. So over here, you know, it's 65 degrees. The house doesn't need very much energy. But when it gets really cold, like down to minus 15, which never really happens in our area, but you know, you can imagine it, you need a lot of energy to keep that house at 70 or 72 degrees. So it's this kind of relationship. The colder it gets, the more energy you need. And if you have a not very effective heat pump, and a single stage heat pump is a version of that. They come in different varieties, but these the cheapest heat pumps typically are single stage, and that means that the colder it gets, the less energy they can create, and that means that at some point they're not able to keep up with the heat load of the house. So you know, somewhere with these units, it's going to be somewhere around 30 degrees or 35 degrees. It just doesn't work anymore. And now you need, in order to keep your house home, you need backup heat. So this is one of the reasons why there's this other myth that's out there that you need gas furnace backup, is because people that's true if you have a not very efficient heat pump that stops really providing enough heat at 30 degrees, then yes, you're going to need some kind of backup heat in order to deal with those colder days. But if you get a more efficient heat pump, and they're often referred to as variable speed, or you even hear them called cold climate heat pumps, they are incredibly effective and can provide plenty of energy down to -5, or in some cases down to even -15 degrees, which will keep your home completely warm at these temperatures that we really don't see here in the Northwest. Now, these are the kinds of devices you want, and there's two reasons you want them. One is because it'll keep your house warm, really energy efficient way down to cold temperatures. But the other reason is because they're so efficient, that means you're using even less energy out here in the times of the year when mostly we're dealing with these temperatures in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. These things are using just tiny bits of energy to keep your house warm. So they're incredibly energy efficient for that reason. And these are the ones that most of the incentives that we'll talk about in a minute are required. Like you can't get an incentive for this kind of heat pump. You wouldn't want to get one, by the way. You want one of these more modern variable speed heat pumps. So that's just a little bit of the technical geekery. Sorry to go too deep into that, but suffice it to say that pretty much every manufacturer out there makes a good one, just like the kind that you're going to want, a variable speed heat pump that's good down to low temperatures. They come from multiple manufacturers. They come in a lot of different configurations we won't talk about today, but when you're in the process of getting quotes, this is something you might want to talk about, because those external units might look like this, which might fit in your external space really well, or they may look like this, which just doesn't fit, where maybe you've got a space that's really narrow between your house and your neighbor, and these larger units won't work, and so you need one of these more narrow size. So all these things are considerations when you actually get down to choose a product. But there's lots of options, and they're all really good quality. But let's talk about cost. If you have an oil furnace, and I know there aren't that many homes that still have oil heating, but man, if you do, you should be thinking about this like right away, because oil furnaces are one of the most expensive ways to heat homes. You can see typically in Washington State, depending on the size of your home, et cetera, it's going to be somewhere between $1,600 and almost $3,000 a year just to heat your home. Electric baseboard is also incredibly expensive. $1,000 to $1,800 a year is not uncommon for a typical home in Washington. And this is why gas furnaces have been popular, is because they're so much cheaper than these other two alternatives, which are sort of the old devices that were available. And this range from 500 to 1,300 is depends partly on the size of your home, but also on the how new and how energy efficient your gas furnace was. Because if you have a relatively new, 95% gas furnace, it might be more like $500 a year to heat your home. But if you've got an older unit that was 80% efficient when you bought it and has been working for 15 years, it's probably 65% efficient now. It could easily be $1,300 or more per year for the same home. So that's why there's this range in numbers here. And the same is true in the range of numbers for heat pumps, because you can get a really efficient one, like I mentioned, like a ductless one or a cold climate heat pump, it could be as low as $350 a year to heat your home. A less efficient one, maybe you've got a bigger home, it could be more than $750. So you can see there's depending on your personal situation, there's actually crossover between these two numbers. So you might see a dramatic savings from switching from an old furnace to a new high efficiency heat pump, but you might not see a lot of savings if you go from a high efficiency gas furnace to a, you know, medium efficiency heat pump. So I hope that you understand that. But in general, most people will see several $100 reduction in their heating bills by switching to a heat pump compared to a gas furnace. And a lot of money in savings if you're going from electric resistance. Okay, from a carbon standpoint, though, it's just, there's no contest. Electric devices, and partly because you have such clean energy in Seattle City Lights territory, a heat pump is creating virtually zero carbon emissions. And even electric baseboard is not bad in Seattle Lights territory, but what's bad is how much you have to pay for it. And you can see that compared to a gas furnace or an oil furnace, these two devices, the electric devices, just blow them away. And this is, again, why, the heat pump comes out on top, because it's more comfortable, it's cheaper to operate, and lower carbon emissions by a long shot. Okay, so I hope you're excited. I hope that makes you excited about actually doing it in your home when the time's right. But let's talk a little bit about how you might want to think about doing it. I highly recommend taking the time to get a home energy audit. Lots of good HVAC contractors offer this service, and now you can actually get a tax credit, a federal tax credit of several $100s because usually it costs a couple $100s to do this. Some people will do it for free, but some people will charge you for it. And the people who charge you for it is because they're doing a more detailed version, so it's worth the money. You're talking about a couple $100 probably, but you'll get a really good idea of whether you need any insulation in your home, what the state of your electricity supply and your wiring is, what issues you might face if you're going to electrify that you just need to be aware of. They can give you some idea about what order of operations you might want to think of things. Like maybe they would recommend you, hey, if you replace some windows or some doors, you might really save a lot of money in terms of your energy expenditures. All this stuff is really good to know with the home energy audit. And that might lead you to some information about weatherization and insulation that's needed. In older homes, it's very common that you need to do this. It's not dramatically expensive. There are incentives for this, but it can save you tons of money. And you want to do that before you put a new system in, because it will reduce the amount of energy that the system needs, which means you can get a smaller system, which costs less, etc., and uses less energy. Newer homes probably aren't going to need this, but older homes, that's common. The other thing that's also common in older homes is you might need some electrical work done. If you have an older house that has a 100 amp panel, those can be a challenge to electrify homes, particularly if you're thinking about an EV. It is possible. There are ways to do it, but it's also, a lot of people just recommend that you get a bigger panel, and there's incentives for that as well. You might need some new wiring. One thing to know is that, let's say that you're thinking about a heat pump and an EV, and you're not sure when you're going to do the EV, but you want to get the heat pump today. I would highly recommend you talk to your electrician about doing the wiring for both those things at the same time. You'll save $1,000, potentially more, by doing things like that together, because you get the electrician there once instead of them driving back and forth, which they charge you for. So you'll definitely save money if you sort of group your electrical work. Or maybe you're thinking about getting an induction stove, have them do the wiring for the HVAC and the induction stove at the same time. And then the other thing I would recommend is, when you're in the process of getting quotes from contractors, I would ask around. Maybe you have friends who've done this, or maybe you can get some recommendations from good contractors. But there's a lot of people that are capable of doing this. There's just some people who they do more of it. They're more bullish on them. They've had more experience. So I'd ask the contractor, hey, do you install a lot of heat pumps? And if they say, oh, not really, I mostly install gas furnaces, you don't want to work with that person. Find someone who's installed a ton of these, because they're the ones who are going to do the best work. The other thing I recommend is get quotes from 3, at least 2, but 3 is a good number, because what you'll find is they're each going to give you, they're going to have different equipment that they have, back to that configuration of the devices on the outside, that might be an issue. Or maybe you just like one of them better. There's going to be differences in the cost that they give you. So I definitely would say get quotes from multiple vendors and then ask them for these things. Ask to see the load calculation. You know that graph I just showed you with the lines and the energy it takes as the energy gets colder? They should be able to generate a graph like that for your house. And if they don't do it, if they can't show it to you, that means they didn't do it. And if they didn't do it, that means that they're guessing how big of a system your home needs. So ask to see it. You don't need to understand what it says. Actually, you just need to know that they did it, because that's the way that you know that they're an experienced contractor is going to put in the right size equipment. You wouldn't be amazed how many people put in equipment that's too big just because they want to be safe. And that actually doesn't work well. It costs you more and it doesn't work as well. The other thing is make sure that they inspect the ducts and the insulation in your home. If they didn't crawl around in your attic and look at the vents and inspect those carefully, they didn't do a good job. So you don't want to work with that person, because maybe you've got an issue there that they should be aware of. So that's some little tips. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit more in detail here, and I'm sure Sarah or others got some good information for you about incentives from Seattle City Lights and maybe even from PSC, but there's fantastic incentives available for this. Puget Sound Energy has up to $2,000 for a heat pump. Seattle City Lights has several $100s available to you for a heat pump installation. And the IRS has great tax credits, which we'll talk about in a minute. And you can add these things together. They combine. All right. So I hope, I wish if I was there, I'd ask for a raise of hands. Maybe I'll do it. And Sarah, you take a look here. How many people have heard of the Inflation Reduction Act in the room here?
Ooh,
Raise your hand.
I would say almost everyone.
Oh, that's fantastic. You guys are on the ball, because what I've heard is that only about 30% of most of Americans have heard about this, but it's an incredible piece of legislation that's possibly the largest climate investment ever in our country's history, and is providing billions of dollars in rebates and tax incentives and for all the things that we talked about and more. And one way to get a sense of this is that I highly recommend checking out this calculator from Rewiring America. You can Google Rewiring America IRA calculator, and this will come up. And you put in your zip code and your homeowner status and your household income, and it'll tell you what kind of incentives are available to you. So for example, here, for most people, you're going to get up to $2,000 in a federal tax credit for a heat pump, which can be in addition to that $2,000 from PSC and $600, I believe, from Seattle City Lights. So now you're talking serious cash in terms of reducing your costs for these things that we just talked about. All right. The last thing before we wrap here is that I want you to feel comfortable that you're not alone doing this. And, I know that some people don't like to be the first one to try new technologies or that sort of thing. These technologies we talked about have been around for hundreds of years. They're just making their way to the United States in a big way. Some countries, all they have available is heat pumps. But this chart shows you what's happening in the United States just over the last 5 years. As people become more and more aware of how great heat pumps are, you can see they've gone from, second most sales to gas furnaces to more than gas furnaces, is completely flipped. And all the data for 2023 is even more dramatic in terms of how they're outselling gas furnaces as more and more people become aware of just how great they are. So I just don't want you to feel like you're, like on the cutting edge or something like this. This is a movement that's just getting more and more momentum every day. All right, so I hope that helps. We have tons of information on our website about this. If you go to Electrify Now, you'll see this is how we organize it. This is how to get clean electricity in your home, how to clean up your or electrify your home and your transportation, etc. We have a newsletter that I'd love you to sign up for that has really helpful tips and information that hopefully you would find optimistic and energizing and motivating. We're not a doom and gloom organization. We're not going to bombard you with bad news about the climate. We're going to give you good news about all the things you can do. And then we have lots of great webinars on all these topics that we just talked. You can go in real depth to learn more about heat pump water heaters, for example, or whatever. And all this is available on our website. So that's it. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you tuning in here, and I'm very happy to ask questions or answer questions if that's the time, or move on. Sarah, what do you recommend?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and dive into Q&A. We have about 10 minutes. And I don't know if we've shown you the room here, but there's about 60 of us here. So it's a
Great.
pretty packed house. I know it's probably weird presenting to folks that you have no idea who is in the room. But I think, Sid, you wanted to start off?
Hey, Brian, thanks for your time. Can you speak to where Oregon is on implementing the rebates that are in the Inflation Reduction Act? I tried Googling Washington and I found nothing.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, you know, for everyone out there, the money from the IRA comes in kind of two buckets, so to speak. There are the federal tax credits, which I mentioned, and those are available today. But the other bucket comes in the form of rebates for income qualified homeowners and even renters. And the difference is that if you meet the federal requirements for your income relative to median income in your area, you can qualify for a rebate where you would get a discount on the cost of the device for everything from induction stoves to heat pumps. That program hasn't been rolled out in any state yet. Most likely will be the end of this year or maybe early next year before we really see that. And it's hard to know what form it's going to take. Like, I'm not sure, for example, that it'll be open to anyone. It might be that because this money for those rebates is being managed by the state may decide, hey, we have these very targeted programs we're going to roll out where we're going to use our rebates for this area or something. You know, I don't know. And so because we don't know that, you know, I generally advise people not to wait. But if you are in the income qualified zone, and you can find out about that from going to that Rewiring America calculator that I mentioned, it will tell you whether you qualify for the rebates, then you might want to wait, because, you know, maybe, you know, there's several more hundreds or even thousands of dollars available to you that you can take advantage of. So yeah, so I'd say check out the calculator, but you have to be a little patient on the rebates. Probably not. I doubt we're going to see it this calendar year.
Great. Okay. Anyone in the room have a question for either Brian or Sid? Okay. And if you don't mind, I'm going to give you the microphone so that folks online can hear.
Sure, thanks. Appreciate the talk. Are there any significant ongoing maintenance costs to having a heat pump? I had a high efficiency gas furnace in my last house, and it's pretty expensive to maintain it once a year. Wonder if there's anything like that for heat pumps.
Sid, do you want to answer that? What's your experience with that?
Hello?
Yep.
I think if you Google online, they're going to suggest that you call a your HVAC guy in once a year to do something. There's not a lot of information online, you know, from the manufacturers on exactly what to do. I want to say something for the audience as well as you, Brian, is that I don't have a lot of money. So one of the challenges of implementing this whole thing was to do it without, you know, within the budget that I had. And I didn't have any rebates or anything like that. So I have to be very careful about where I spend my money. I don't have money to call an HVAC guy to come in and spray some foam stuff on this thing every year, which I don't really know is actually good for it. So I just kind of clear, you know, I vacuumed there's filters in the wall unit. I have a mini split that kind of sits on the wall. There's a plastic filter that you can just take out, and I vacuum the dust off of that, you know, once a month or something. You can see when it's caked with dust. And the compressor unit outside, you just check on it. If, you know, if there's leaves and things that are clogging it up, you have to, you know, get stuff off of it. You want to make sure the coils and the fan are all clear. On days when it's cold and icy, sometimes I'll go out on the porch and I'll hear it making noise because there's ice caked on the cowling and the fan is hitting it. And so I'll have to go out, what I do is maybe, not approved, but I'll take a hair dryer out and I'll aim the hair dryer at the part that's hitting the fan and get the ice to melt off. But, that's kind of like real world stuff. I'm sure a contractor will come in and do something every year, but I've had my mini split. It's a Mitsubishi for about 5-6 years, and it just works. And
they're incredibly efficient device and effective. And sorry to cut you off there, Sid, but just jump on that. I mean, I think that most contractors will want you to have a maintenance program, but I'm not quite sure about how important that is. And you don't want to spend a lot of money on it, because they basically, if they're going to come to your home, what they're going to do is they're mostly going to just check, which can be important to do every once in a while. Make sure you've got enough, don't have a refrigerant leak or something like that, which would be really bad. But you would kind of notice that because your heat pump wouldn't be working very well. So I think for the most part, it's one of those things where, you always have to be a little bit wary about these insurance programs that people, want to sell you when you buy anything new. They want to say, well, I got this, maintenance program for XYZ. So I always have a little bit of concern about those, but you definitely want to have it checked occasionally, just to make sure that it's still operating the way it should. And like Sid said, there's some things you just want to do, keep it clean. That defrost mode in winter, it gets icicles on it. That's the way it works. So it has to defrost. So we'll go into defrost mode, and that's why it's making that noise. It's because it's defrosting to get rid of the ice, which takes a few minutes. But anyway, I hope that helps. There's some maintenance, but it's not outrageous.
Great. And then I don't want to ignore folks that are tuning in online. If we could go ahead and take a question from someone joining in on Zoom.
Our first question on Zoom will come from Russell. Russell, you can unmute yourself and ask your question when you're ready.
Russell, are you there? I think you're on mute still.
Well, we can move on to Dan Benson.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I have actually two questions. So one is that I currently have a gas furnace. It's not too old, maybe 10 years old. If I switch to a heat pump, would it be better to replace the gas furnace entirely, or somehow add it as a supplement to the existing gas furnace? And then my second question is the outside unit that for the heat pumps that you put outside your house, how far away from the house can it be? I don't have a really good convenient place that's like really close to the house, but how far away can I get from the house to place one of those units?
Well, on your first question, if your furnace is 10 years old, it's unlikely that it will make sense to just add a heat pump. And that's because your furnace won't be able to work with, it won't be sophisticated enough to work with the new heat pumps. If you have what I've heard from contractors, we did a webinar on this exact thing. And basically what they were saying is that if it's 5 years old or newer than 5 years old, then it is possible to put a heat pump on your gas furnace, and your gas furnace will basically never turn on. Your heat pump will do all the work, and your furnace will be basically working as a big fan blowing the air. But with older furnaces, that's not advised. So I don't know that I would want to do that. Plus, you're going to get in this weird situation where, you've got this furnace that might break in 5 years, and now you've got a new heat pump and an old furnace, and you got to replace another half your system. So I think most likely you're going to want to think about replacing the whole thing. In terms of the distance from your home, it can be a little bit of a ways away, but typically they don't want to move very far away, and the lines have to be buried, I believe. So there's some regulations about that. I'm not super familiar with it because most people end up putting them quite near their home. Sometimes even attached to the home. That's another thing you can do. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Okay. Well, we are at 8:01. So I want to let folks that kind of have a hard time or deadline to go ahead and head home to do so. But before you do, I went ahead and printed out more of the resources that we had on the table back there because I honestly wasn't sure how many people were going to show up and I didn't print enough. So if you didn't get any of the resources, they're on the table in the back of the room. And then I also just want to give a really big thank you to Brian for presenting this evening and sharing all of his wisdom. Yeah. And then I also want to thank Sid. He really pushed us to get started on talking about home electrification and specifically heat pumps. So I do feel that if it were not for his push, we would not be here tonight. So thank you, Sid. Yeah. And Sid and I will be available for just a few more minutes if you have any other lingering questions or whatnot that you want to ask. But thank you all so much for coming, and I hope you are able to take things home with you and you learned a lot today.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to stay around too if it works, if people have more questions, but I'm sure Sid can answer them.
Okay, great. Okay.
He leaving right now, or
You want to ask him a question?
Well, I don't know, I'll ask you the question.
Okay.
Can he get specific or broadly specific about brands that are good or brands to avoid?
Oh, sure. We have a question, Brian, about brands that are like good brands to go after, and then if you have any suggestions on brands like not to have for heat pumps.
Yeah, I mean, it's that's a tricky question because basically all the manufacturers make good ones, but the ones that you see that are really, I think, at the forefront of the heat pump kind of movement are Mitsubishi, like Sid has, is one of the ones, and these Japanese brands were the companies that really pioneered a lot of the technology. So Mitsubishi and Daikin are two, but a lot of the U.S. brands have made partnerships with these Japanese brands. So Carrier, for example, works with Toshiba. Carrier makes excellent products. And those are the three brands that I'm the most aware of. And I think they have between the three of them have the largest market share in terms of heat pumps. But there's other good ones. Bosch makes good ones from Germany. Lennox and other companies all have their products. Goodman, which is a sort of affiliated with Carrier, they're good too. So, as it turns out, the contractors that I recommend in Oregon, where I'm familiar with the contractors here in Portland, I have 5 that I work with, and the brands they use are Daikin, Mitsubishi, and Carrier. So, I'm super familiar with those, and I know they're good products, but there are other good ones out there too. I don't want to
Can you repeat those 3 brands again one more time for the room here?
Daikin, Mitsubishi, and Carrier. Sid, do you have any thoughts about that?
I do have pretty strong thoughts, actually, Brian. Do you know who makes the Carrier unit? Is it a Medea rebranded unit? I'm convinced that many of the American legacy HVAC companies that we're all familiar with furnaces sell rebranded Medea or Gree equipment.
Yeah. And Medea actually makes really good stuff, by the way. I mean, but it's true that what you find is that like Carrier works with Toshiba. They're owned by the same, I don't know who bought who, but they're part of the same company now. So, and Toshiba makes really excellent products. They're one of the market leaders in Japan. So, and it's true also here in the United States that there's factories that make Daikin products and are making other brands the same factory. So it's a little confusing, but I'm pretty confident about those 3 brands as being like really good ones.
Okay, and then
I just see a lot of when I helped a neighbor do a heat pump in her house, she did get actually, let me rephrase that. In kind of poking around on sites like Nextdoor, a lot of people will get proposals for like Lennox heat pump, you know, mini splits and Bryant mini splits and things like that. And it's never clear, you know, but what's clear to me is that they think that the equipment comes from the company whose name is on the cabinet. And I think in this particular case, there's a lot of the Medea and Gree equipment that companies are slapping their name on it. And like you said, this is perfectly fine equipment. I don't have a problem with Medea equipment, but if you get Medea equipment, you should pay a Medea price for it. You shouldn't get a Medea unit and pay a Lennox price for it.
Mhm.
I have strong feelings about that.
Yeah.
But I would agree with you. If I were to talk to somebody getting quotes today, I'd say see if you can get a quote involving Mitsubishi equipment or Daikin, or I would even throw Fujitsu in there.
Yeah.
I don't know about Carrier, to be honest with you, because Carrier is kind of pricey.
Okay, and I don't mean to cut off this question, but we have some more folks in the room that are hoping to ask questions, so.
Sure.
Yes, I have a tax credit question. My name is Carolyn, and so I'm wondering when it says on this, I have a sheet that Sarah kindly printed out with all the tax credits. I'm wondering when it says up to $2,000 a year, if that can apply over multiple years for the same unit. So if I have like a whatever $16,000, like, which is a quote that we received a while ago anyway, like, and we're paying it over, you know, the multiple years, can I do the same tax credit? Can I apply for the same tax credit multiple times? Yeah.
I think you can only get the $2,000 for that device, but next year you could go back and buy another device for, you know, up to whatever the limit is. So I think those limits there, one way to think about them is that it's a good idea to space out your different things. Like say you did a heat pump this year. Next year you could do a heat pump water heater and maximize the benefits for that. But if you did both those things in the same year, you would get less money available to you from
Ryan, is this a question that you can take forward since you run in a lot more knowledgeable circles? Because like she said, the heat pump is not $2,000. It's $10,000. It's $20,000. So are people able to claim $2,000 a year over multiple years until they get up to 10 or 15?
No, you're only able to get, it's per device. So per device per year. So whatever you would be able to get up to $2,000 depending on your tax bracket and everything in the year that you purchased it.
Okay, then we'll go ahead and take a question from online.
Kit McGurn asks, given the timing of the IRA incentives and rebates don't kick in until 2024, and state incentives will vary, when should we in Shoreline time our heat pump conversion? Do we have any more details on what we can expect in Washington for these Inflation Reduction Act federal rebates and incentives?
Yeah, for the rebates, I don't know when those are going to be online, but the tax incentives and the rebates from the federal rebates from Puget Sound Energy and Seattle City Lights, and Sarah, maybe you can speak more about that. Those are available right now, but and the tax credits are available right now, but the rebates from the federal government are not available, and I don't know when they will be, and I'm not sure how much availability there will be there. It's a relatively small amount of money that they have for those. I mean, it's really important money, but I don't know. I just don't want to make a lot of promises about those rebates. You know, I know the tax credits are there. I know these rebates from PSE and Seattle Lights are there. The other one is just, I don't know.
And
it would be unfortunate to wait for that and then miss the PSE one. You know, that would be, I don't know. Sarah, what are your thoughts about the local incentives?
Yeah, from what I understand and how folks have described it to me is that unless you were like falling in that income qualified bracket, it really is best that you go ahead and take advantage of the tax credits that exist now. If not, if you fall into the low moderate income tax brackets, it may make sense for you to wait until those different rebates are announced from the state. As Brian said, though, we don't actually know when those are coming. We've been hearing late this year, early next year, but when they'll actually go into effect, we don't know. As he mentioned, there's also other rebates out there from Seattle City Light, Puget Sound Energy, which if you go onto our city website, we have a webpage all about home electrification. And we've tried to compile kind of a list of cost savings incentives that are out there right now. And then also a very simplified version of like what is to come with these rebates. And I do want to mention too, as far as I understand, there are some sticking points with being able to stack certain rebates and tax credits. I think, and Brian, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think depending on what they are, you can't stack them. But again, we don't really know what those rebates will look like and how they'll roll out until the state announces it.
Yeah, I'm not sure how that will work either on the federal ones. I don't think there's any reason, but correct me if I'm wrong, sir. I don't think there's any reason why you couldn't stack the Puget Sound Energy, for example, and the Seattle City Lights and the tax credits. I think you can stack those, but I'm not.
You can stack those, yeah. And I think there's some weird things with
the rebates that, I don't know whether that will be possible.
Yeah, and I will say, let's not even just go on my guesstimate. On Rewiring America, if you go into their heat pump pages, they have very helpful information about what can be stacked and what cannot, and that's already up there. So go fact check to me out there, please. Okay, can we do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
Great.
I have had a heat pump for a number of years, and my most recent one, I'm very unhappy with the customer service. And when I get a new one, which I probably will have to do pretty soon, I wonder, is there any, I definitely won't buy from this company again. It's a local, well thought of company, and I've had to have my, the stuff replaced, and I've had them fail to find errors and that were expensive. Is there any place I can go for advice about firms and their reliability in this area? Maybe Sid knows better about that. About where I might go to get some reliability statistics.
There's really no source. You have to use what's available, whether that's Google reviews or talking to people that have used contractors. So you're pretty sure that it was a bad installation and that it's not the equipment side, it's the installation side.
And so for Brian, in case you can't hear that, there's just been kind of ongoing issues and that she doesn't really know.
Yeah. I guess what I'd say is that, we're here in Oregon, we're doing a lot of work to try to create a statewide network of people that we are really comfortable recommending. It's hard to do. And there isn't such a thing that I'm aware of in Washington state, although hopefully there will be sometime soon, but I just don't know when. But there are a few things you could try. I think, as Sid mentioned, it's worth it just checking the reviews on Yelp or Nextdoor, whatever. But there's some designations that the manufacturers themselves have. Like, so for example, each of Mitsubishi calls it their diamond dealers. And the diamond dealers are the dealers that have the highest level of service qualification from the Mitsubishi brand. And every brand has a similar thing. I can't remember what it's called for carrier, but every brand will have that. And so sometimes if you poke around on the brand websites, that you can find that information, and that's a good way to go, because in order to get that qualification, they have to have taken all the certification, and they also have to have sold a lot of units. So that means they just have a lot of experience with them. So that can help. I'll try to remember what it is, the carrier name, but each of them have that same kind of classification where their premium dealers are noted that way, and they'll say on their websites. So I would use that.
Well, thank you so much. You want to do one more?
Or I have two, but one question I got a couple of times is, will this recording of the webinar, where will that be available if people want it?
That is a great question that I do not currently have an answer to. But I would say that it would be linked on our home electrification webpage, if anything, which if you haven't been there, it's just shorelinewa.gov /goelectric.
And then last question from Ruby. I've gotten 2 estimates, and both companies told me I needed to keep my gas furnace for winter. Does that mean they don't know about the best or latest heat pumps? Should I just move on and find other companies to do estimates, or might they be right?
I can't believe they're right. I mean, I think that's just because you're talking to, and this is one of the issues with the HVAC industry at the moment. And it's one of the reasons why here in Oregon, we have spent so much time on building a network of dealers that we know give good service and won't try to talk you out of it. But you do not need a gas backup in Seattle. There's no way. You might need that if you lived in Alaska, but I really don't think that's true. I think it just means that that's those companies are most familiar with that setup. But if you talk to someone who's selling Mitsubishi product, they're not going to tell you that, because they don't sell furnaces. And so all they sell are the heat pumps that are incredibly efficient down to really cold temperatures. So same for Daikin. And I think you'll find the same if you talk to a qualified carrier contractor. So again, it comes down to talking to the right people. And unfortunately, there are just some people, like I presented to the carrier at the carrier sales meetings a while ago in Seattle. And so they had all the carrier dealers and the Bryant dealers from the whole region. And I was talking about electrification, why this is the future, blah, blah, blah. And I was talking to a lot of them afterwards. And I would say that in the room, there are 30% of the HVAC contractors in the room were super excited about heat pumps, and they were all in, and they were doing a great business with heat pumps, and they're the kind of people you want to work with. There's 30% who will kind of sell you, well, if you want a heat pump, they'll put it in. If you want a furnace, they'll put it in. And then there's another 30% who would they would rather put a furnace in for you, because that's what they've been doing their whole lives, and that's what they know. So you know what I mean? That's just kind of the state of the industry. And so I feel like it's really important to find, you want to be in that 30% that are really excited about it and are installing a lot of them, because they're the ones who are going to give you the best service and the best products and the best advice. So I hope that helps, but it's a little bit tricky. If anyone has a specific question about that and you're looking for a contractor, I might be able to help you, because I know some people in the Seattle area who I can turn to for recommendations. So you can email me, and I will try to set you up with some good information on that. My email is on our website, electrifynow.net. And if you have questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. So feel free to email me, and I can try to connect you with a good contractor if you'd like.
And I will say that his website is also just full of a wealth of past webinars about a variety of topics, including like pretty much, I feel like all the ins and outs of heat pumps. So there's just a lot of information and resources available with Electrify Now. All right. Well, I don't want to hold up anyone else too much longer. But thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your evening. And thank you, Sid and Brian, for hosting this event as well.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for coming today, and good luck with your electrification projects. It's exciting. Bye-bye.
Could you do us a favor?